So, of course, by this time, Daniel has already interpreted several of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. So they call Daniel, who's the high wizard at that time, they call him, and they ask him to interpret the writing. And the interpretation that Daniel gives is frightening. He basically says, Nebuchadnezzar, you have not followed God. You have turned your back on him, and now this is the end of your reign. So Nebuchadnezzar, that very night, is slain, right? Darius the Mede takes over the kingdom, and that's how Babylon becomes part of the Persian Empire, the Mede-Persian Empire, okay? So can I have, and then it's after that, King Darius puts Daniel in the lion's den. So just giving you some historical accuracy, where we are. So King Xerxes, remember we said was after Cyrus, and then it was Xerxes. So go ahead, next slide. So here's the Persian kings of the Persian kingdom. Okay, first we have Cyrus the second, and he was the first king that allowed the exiles to go back to Jerusalem, and he paid for them to rebuild the temple. So you know where we are right now. Okay, and then we have this guy who was only there for 8 years, and nobody knows anything about him. And then the next king, Smerdis, what a name, huh? Smerdis. He was only king for a year, so I don't know what happened to him. Probably he got killed. Okay, and the next one to come up is Darius, and he's the one that allows the temple building to be, when they stopped for 16 years and they didn't build the temple, and then all of a sudden God says, hey, quit building your own houses and build my temple. And so that's under King Darius, and then after Darius we have Xerxes, and that's when Esther comes in. So are you guys with me? So we rebuilt the temple, everything's going back, but not all of the exiles left the Babylon or Persian area. The Jewish exiles were spread all over the Persian Empire. Some of them went back, and about 50,000 of them went back. And many, many stayed for different reasons. We don't know why they stayed. Maybe they had families and businesses, and they just didn't want to go back. Okay, so that's where we are. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about King Darius for a minute. King Darius, he twice tried to invade Greece. So having the entire Persian Empire, which was 127 provinces that stretched all the way down to Chad in Africa, okay? I mean, this took up all of Europe and all the way down. This King Darius, he tried to take over the Greek Empire also, because he was just got to have the whole world, right? And so the very first time he tried, a storm came in and it destroyed his entire fleet of ships. So he has to go back. So he rallies everybody, gets them going, let's go again. And so he goes again, and this time the Athenians, the people from Athens, defeated his troops at the Battle of Marathon. And some of you might have seen, I can't see it because it's too gruesome, but maybe you've seen the movie 300 or heard of the movie 300, and that's the story of that battle. Okay, where the Athenians actually defeated a very, very large troops from the other country, from Persia. And then finally he died before he could get his third battle of Greece going. Okay? Then his son Xerxes, go ahead, next slide. Son Xerxes takes over after him. And it is Xerxes' desire to avenge his father's deaths, the things that happened when they couldn't take over Greece. He really, really wants to take over Greece. Okay, that's a big part to him. So he wants to avenge his father's defeats. And this guy's known as a tyrannical leader. He's a jerk, okay? But think about it. If you were raised and no one ever said no to you, if every wish and every whim and everything you wanted was always granted to you immediately without question, you'd be kind of a jerk, maybe, I think. Anyway, he was impulsive, ambitious, cruel, and arrogant. Okay, those are the things that described him. He spent the first 3 years that he was king trying to raise enough money to go back to Greece again and defeat them. Okay, so he wanted a massive army and navy. So what did he do? A couple years into it, he holds this 180-day celebration. And the idea is he's going to show off all the wealth of the kingdom. He's going to show off all the gold, all the things that he has. And then people are going to give him money so that they can go back to Greece. Okay, so that's his goal. So he's having a 180-day huge celebration with all his military troops. I'm trying to think of like what it would be like today, but sometimes in North Korea, they have those big parades and they bring out the big missiles and they want everybody to see, wow, we're powerful and we're great and everything. So that's kind of the idea. And so we're right there at the beginning of Esther, right there. He actually did, after the book of Esther, he actually did raise 700,000 troops, 360,000 troops and 700 ships. And he went back to try to get Greece, and he was defeated again. And that was the beginning of the end of the Persian Empire. So this desire to take over Greece was the big thing for these two kings, and it led to the downfall of the whole empire. Okay, but we're going to go back a little bit to where Esther comes into the story. So can I have the next slide? You guys all with me on who Xerxes is now? Okay. Okay, this is just a quick map to show you the whole Persian Empire at that time is all of the red. That's quite a big empire, right? And one of the things he was known for, and the Persian Empire was known for, was for tolerance against other religions. They let people keep their original religions and didn't force them to become any kind of state religion or anything like that. But you can see the blue parts are the oceans, so he really had a lot, big, huge. And I need one more slide. She keeps disappearing. Oh, there she is. Okay, so let's go to chapter 1 in Esther. If you have the Bibles, you can look. But it basically says, this is what happened during the time of Xerxes. The Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. Okay? Big area. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. Now, the citadel of Susa still exists today. It is in Iran. Susa is in Iran. You can actually go and see the ruins. And it's a really, someplace I'd love to go sometime, although I don't know if my travels will take me to Iran or not. It says basically the military leader, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes, the nobles, they were all present, okay? For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. His glory, his majesty, right? No mention of God there. Okay, so when these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days. Now, here in this group, we have put on things like the women's Christmas luncheon, and that's a lot of work, and it's a lot of planning. Can you imagine planning that for 7 days? A nonstop banquet? And it said it was from the least to the greatest, but there had to have been servants that were serving and preparing all this food and doing this. This was a big deal. Okay, so let's read about it. He said, lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material, and silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, and each one was different from each other. So somebody had to create all these different designs so that everybody knew which goblet was theirs. Okay? They were served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. In the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in its own way, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man whatever he wished. Now, is there anywhere else in the Bible where we've seen men and a lot of wine, and it hasn't turned out really well? That's kind of a theme. Okay, so Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he was drunk, okay? He commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing the royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and the nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Okay, so he's mad at Queen Vashti. So it's really easy to imagine, no, I'm not coming, right? But there was more to it than that. So can I have the next slide, please? Oh, no, this one. Sorry, back. So Queen Vashti, she was perhaps The only person in the entire Persian kingdom that actually had a claim to the throne. She could have been the leader if they had had female queens then that got to lead. She was the most royal of everyone. She was the great-granddaughter of King Nebuchadnezzar. She was also the granddaughter of King Belshazzar, and you saw them on that chart that I showed you. She was the queen of the Persian Empire. She had the only true royal claim to the empire, and she's married to Xerxes. So that's basically who she is, okay? So next slide. Okay, so we read Esther chapter 1. Okay, and this is where we ended. On the 7th day when the king was merry with wine, he ordered her to come, and she said no. Okay, next slide, please. Xerxes, this is a quote. Xerxes was planning a war with Greece. He needed beautiful and alluring Vashti to appear, to show all of the visiting dignitaries that he was powerful and magnificent enough to defeat the Greeks. It was an embarrassment for her not to show up. Okay, so she's maybe making a political statement here or maybe a personal statement. And what's interesting is there's two different views on Vashti through history. And so I'm going to show you what those are right now. Okay, the two views of Vashti. So she was one of two things, some people say. Either she, in the traditional Jewish view, they look at her as disobedient and villainous and vain, deserving of what she got, arrogant. She was an anti-Semite. They said she beat her Jewish slaves and made them work on holy days and things like that and on the Sabbath. And she was also selfish. So if you read through the Talmud, they talk about Vashti. She's not a good example for women to be held up. Okay, you are not supposed to be a Vashti. But interesting enough, through history, we now see her as something else. She might be the feminist hero of the Bible. Okay, some people see her as an icon of resistance. Some people see her as retaining her dignity by refusing to show up. She was courageous, the victim of an evil king in a court. The example of self-respect. She refused to be abused, and she was independent. So isn't it interesting how history can rewrite, and now she's somebody as a symbol of feminism because she refused to show up. And although it's not stated in the Bible, it is understood at the time of Persia that she probably was asked to come and appear in only her crown. Okay? So we're talking about walking naked through a whole banquet of naked drunk men. Not exactly what Vashti wanted to do that day, but no one says no to the king, right? Except she did, which was unheard of at the time. So whether you see her as someone who was selfish and said, no, I'm not about to do what the king wants me to do, or, oh, I'm not about to be abused. It's just interesting how different views of her have come across, okay? But you rarely ever hear a little girl called Vashti, do you? Never heard baby Vashti? You don't hear it very often, but you do hear baby Esther, right? Okay, next one. So I even found a children's book online, and it's called Queen Vashti and the Comfy Pants. Okay, so I'm going to read you what it says. It says, wow, hold it. Or now, hold it. Vashti scolded, freeze. Could he at least say thanks or please? Queen Vashti found this very rude. She did not like his attitude. She told the messenger, please go and tell the king I said no. And if you could, please do explain. I have my friends to entertain. Because she was having her own banquet at the time, right? And then it says, I will not don my royal crown or change into a fancy gown. I am not in the mood to dance, for I am in my comfy pants. So you can see how literature has even shown, this is a children's book, showing, I'm not coming to do his bidding because I'm in my comfy pants. Okay, I'm not sure that's how it went. Next slide. So, they were known at this time in the Persian courts for getting very, very drunk and passing edicts, okay? So they decided they were going to do all these things, and then the next day they kind of woke up and went, oh, what did we do? Okay, and then they kind of but edicts could not be rescinded. Do you know why? Because it took 3 months for an edict to get out to the entire Persian Empire. So by the time you sent it out, it was pretty impossible to bring it back and say, no, that's not what we meant. So they would pass another edict to kind of counteract that one. But the king's edicts could not be changed. Once they were passed, they were there. And a lot of it had to do with the messengers going out and reaching everyone. And by the time they reached the people that were 3 months out, everybody was already doing what the edict said. So let's pick it up right there. It says, he was embarrassed, right? He had all these people, all these things he wanted to do. He wanted to invade Greece, and his queen doesn't show up, which shows that he doesn't have control of his own household. So how is he going to do a war? See, he was very, very embarrassed and very drunk, and so he gathered all his nobles together. And it says, since it was customary for the king to consult experts in the matter of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king. According to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti, he asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. And one of the people says back, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all nobles and all people. So they're going to hold her up as an example, right, to the entire kingdom, the entire part of Persia, and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have learned about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end to discord. Wow, they blamed her for the entire women of the entire empire for being disobedient now. So they really held her up. So King Xerxes, and it said, also let the king give her a royal position to someone else who is better than her, or more worthy than her, some of them say. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout the vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest. Do you think that's going to happen just because you pass an edict? No, because one thing they were missing was God's rules for marriage, right? Where it said each one to submit to each other, just like the bride for Christ and things. These were not holy marriages. These were not loving contexts that they were having in. So anyway, he passes this proclaim, and the king says Vashti is gone. So some people believe Vashti was just sent off to another royal house to live the rest of her life. Some people think she was beheaded. So either way, Vashti's not seen again in the Bible or in the story at all or anything like that. So what does the king do? It says, later when the anger of King Xerxes had subsided, he remembered Vashti. Remember how they get a little sober and then they go, oh man, what did I do? I just banished my queen, right? So the nobles come up with the grand plan. Let's go around and get all the virgins and all the beautiful women. We'll bring them all here. We'll put them in the harem. And one by one, you can sample the virgins. And if you like them, you can keep that one and make her queen. Does that sound like a plan women would come up with? No, that sounds like a man plan, doesn't it? It reminds me of the Islamic, you'll have so many virgins when you die, and every day there'll be virgins again, and wow. Okay, so that's the plan. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is the very first reversal that we see. Queen Vashti has to depart in order for Queen Esther to come, right? So if Queen Vashti had not said no, Esther would not have been made queen because they wouldn't need a new queen. So once again, we see God's hand in this, right? We see God planning this. He probably influenced Vashti to say no and influenced the court to pass these things so that Esther could be brought to where he needed her to be to save her people. Okay, so that's the very first reversal we see. Next one. Okay, this is an example of the citadel in Susa. This is the women's quarters where they had the harem. Okay, so you can see it was all the way down, and there were 3 different parts of a harem. Can I have the next slide, please? Oh, there's an example of what one painter thought the harems looked like. You can see the women are all dressed up and they're getting beautified, and that people are waiting on them. So this is a romantic idea of what a harem looks like. Okay, and the next one. Okay, so a harem in Persia was not just concubines and virgins. It was every woman in the whole royal family and everything lived in that complex that I showed you. So everyone from royal nieces and nephews and cousins and queens and things like that, or lower queens and things like that, all the way down to concubines, which were considered about a half of a person. Okay? So they had children, in-laws, all kinds of people were it was considered all of the women, okay? So separate areas for royal women and court members were one area. Then there was an area for the virgins, and then there was an area for the concubines, okay? They were all kept separate from each other. So once a virgin spent the night with the king, she went to the king that night, and then she left the virgin harem, and then the next morning when she left, she had to become a concubine, okay? She couldn't go back to the virgins. Concubines could never marry. They could never return to their families, and they were seen as half people, and they would only see the king again if he was pleased with her. So the king had all the power in that situation. Okay, some women were bought at slave markets, some were given as gifts, and some were even, some people asked to join. They wanted to be part of the harem. It's maybe not a bad life. And some were forcefully taken. So we don't know how Esther ended up being collected as one of the virgins that the king got to do. She could have been forced. Maybe everybody said, oh, Esther's the most beautiful person around here, take her. Maybe somebody was jealous of her and put her up. Maybe she volunteered. We don't know. That part's not in the Bible. But it doesn't matter, because what we do know is God placed her where she needed to be. Okay, so guards watched the guards were placed at the entrance, and no men could come into the harem at all. Okay? And while they were separated, they weren't secluded. Royal women still got to do things like ride horses. They got to learn how to shoot arrows. They went to banquets. So don't think of a harem as being someplace where no one could ever leave and go outside or anything like that. They were separated, but they weren't necessarily secluded and never seen. Okay, but the thing is, during the Persian Empire, women didn't really want to be seen. They didn't want to be noticed. That wasn't a good thing. So harem gave them protection and also gave them a place where to stay away from the prying eyes of the public. But the women in the harem still had power. They still could influence the court and things like that, the royal women. Okay. So the next character we meet in this book is Mordecai. So it talks about Mordecai. Now in the citadel of Susa, there was a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai. And Mordecai is we don't know how old he was at this point, but I'm guessing probably 50 or 60, something like that. And he's either the cousin or the uncle to Esther. So he has taken Esther in, who has no parents, and he has become like a protector to her, and he treats her like a daughter. So he loves her very much. And he keeps an eye on Esther, even when she is taken to be part of the king's virgin harem. So he positions himself around the gates. We don't know exactly what his role was or anything like that, but somehow he was able to stay close to Esther. And during this time, we know that Esther was taken in with all the other virgins, and she spent a solid year getting ready to meet the king. For 6 months, they said they treated her body with myrrh. Okay? If you can imagine a royal makeover, she was probably beautiful already, but they not only taught her, they probably had her exercise to make certain muscles stronger so she looked better. They did facial treatments and stuff. They probably taught her how to please the king. Okay? So we don't know exactly what Esther went through, but they kind of describe it in there. We don't know how she acted, but she did seem to have the favor of people. So a lot of the people that ran the harem seemed to like her a lot, and they gave her a little bit more prestige. They raised her up above others. They gave her certain people to help her. So one of the eunuchs took a fancy to Esther because Esther was probably kind and gentle and sweet. We don't know. But God again placed her in a position where she could be one of the ones that was chosen by the king. So, okay, so she's one of the people that's all there. And it says, when the turn came for Esther, the girl Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested. So she took wise counsel. And one of the reasons they said they took things with them is because they couldn't go back to those virgin quarters. So if there was an heirloom from home, if there was something they wanted to keep with them, they had to take it in with them. But she took nothing other than what he suggested. Okay? Oh, by the way, also, Mordecai did tell Esther not to reveal that she was Jewish. We don't know exactly why, except that in court intrigue and things like that, maybe it wasn't a good time to say, hey, by the way, I'm Jewish. So she hid that, and she probably looked Persian enough, or somehow she didn't look, I don't know if there's a Jewish look, but this is an example of a photograph of what she might have looked like. We don't know. So she spends one ring, she raises to gets special cream, and then she gets the king approval and he decides he's the virgin that she likes the best, and now she's queen. Okay, so we're caught up. Esther is where she's supposed to be. Okay, next slide. So Mordecai is at the front gates of the palace keeping an eye on Esther during this time, and he happens to be positioned in the perfect spot for him to overhear a plot to kill King Xerxes. So there's two officials, and they're talking, hey, let's get King Xerxes later. And they're plotting, right? And Mordecai is again positioned by God in the exact spot he needs to be for him to overhear this conversation. And he takes the initiative to somehow get in contact with Esther. We don't know if he spoke to her through a harem wall. We don't know if she sent messengers, exactly what it was. But he was able to get to Esther, and he was able to say, hey, I overheard this plot to kill the king. And Esther goes to the king and tells it, we heard this plot. They investigated, and lo and behold, it's true. The two men that were plotting against the king were impaled on poles, which doesn't sound like the best way to go. But it's written in the king's rules or his history of the whole palace and of his reign that Mordecai helped him, a plot to fail against him. So that's written in there. And that's going to be important later when we go on. So one more slide. So you might be asking yourself, exactly who is the book of Esther about? Because there's some main characters. There's King Xerxes, there's Vashti, Mordecai, there's Esther. We're going to find also a man named Haman in the next couple chapters. So which is the main character? None of them. God is the main character in Esther. And God is already placing people without their knowledge, without even knowing what their role is going to be yet. He's placing them into positions that he needs them to be in order for him to complete and fulfill his future plans for the world, to save the Jews. Okay? If all the Jews are annihilated, that's going to be a problem. Those are his chosen people. That's who he wants to protect. And he sets in motion plans and lifts people up and brings them down in order for him to accomplish his goals. So next slide. Okay, God positions people to accomplish his purposes. He orchestrates the circumstances of life to advance his eternal plan. That's going to be the theme of what we're talking about in Esther, about how he orchestrates these things, and he is orchestrating things in your life every day that you may not be aware of. Or you might have found yourself in certain circumstances where you can't see God working. He's silent to you, and it just doesn't seem, but you can be absolutely assured that God is working on your behalf at all times. You may not see it for 10 years. I can look back at a time in my life that I might have shared with you before that God orchestrated my life. I'm sure you can look at other times. I was a freshman at Cal Poly in college, and I was running to be a little sister of a fraternity. Now, as an 18-year-old on my own for the first time, I had no business being a little sister for a fraternity. But that's what all my friends were doing, so I wanted to do it. So we went through an interview system. Basically, we were girls that were going to hang out the fraternity for parties. Okay? Kind of like one of the harem members in a way. Okay? So we were there, and they had to vote on it. And I had actually defeated one of the guys in the fraternity for an office way back, like several years before. He stood up in front of everyone and said I was not a good person, that I should not be let into the fraternity. I was the only person not allowed in. You can imagine what that did to my self-confidence at Cal Poly. Let's just say I didn't finish there the next year. I actually left Cal Poly because I felt like I didn't know what happened till later, till one of the guys told me that this guy had stood up. But it led me straight into the arms of Jim. I ended up getting engaged by the end of that year, and I've had 36 years of marriage with a man and no past in a fraternity that I have to worry about. And I see that as the hand of God protecting me. I really do. Because I was stupid and thought I knew what I wanted. And God said, no, that's not where I want you to be. That's not where I'm positioning you. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. In fact, I'd never seen the guy before. But I'd always thought I would walk right up to him, grab his hand, and say, thank you so much for standing up and telling everyone that I'm not a good person. Because it changed my life. So there may be times when you've seen God working in your life, and then you can't see the results till later, and you go, oh. You hear people say it all the time. That was a God thing, right? Recognize those times in your life when you say, that's a God thing. It's not circumstance. It's not the stars lining up. It's not because the planets were in a certain position, like people like to say. It's not karma. It's God working in your life. So let's go ahead and pray. Dear Lord, I thank you so much for this opportunity today to share with these women what you have taught me about the book of Esther and about how you work through our lives without us even knowing it, to position us to be able to fulfill your eternal plans. And Lord, I just ask that over this next week, that these women would pause for a moment and look to see where you were working in their lives and where you have worked in the past to bring a result that they didn't expect. And I ask, Lord, that you would be with Peggy and also with Barbara as both of them are recovering. And I ask that you would just be with all of those who are having medical problems or stresses in their life that they're facing, and that you would remind us with your Holy Spirit, Lord, that you are our strength and our rest, and that we can always rely on you and trust in your plans. Amen. Okay. So we'll finish Esther, the next two. If you want to go ahead and read ahead or read back, there's only 10 chapters in Esther. It's really not that long. So we're going to do chapters 3 through 7 the next time. So if you want to read ahead, it's pretty easy reading. Okay, and then I actually have some discussion questions that Jim brought that I left at home, but I didn't know I was going to need. And so we have discussion questions, so we'll go to our groups. Okay.